Have you ever wondered how to recognize a brilliant business idea? An idea that creates real value for people and maybe even changes the world? Many people aren't sure when it's worth to put all your eggs in one basket. In this video, I show you the 3 most important criteria you can use to tell if you're onto something big. First, a great idea has to solve a problem. Some also say it should be a painkiller rather than a vitamin pill. But now you may ask yourself, aren't there great companies that were born out of ideas that don't solve big problems? For instance, what big problem on earth does an app like Instagram solve? Good question. Maybe the problem that people used to get bored on bathrooms. Well, anyway, there are 2 ways to go. Either the pain your customer has is very, very big, or you're solving a problem that's small but that many people have. The best thing, of course, is when both things come together. That is, when a vast number of people have a tremendous pain that you can relieve or prevent. But how do you find such an idea? The most important thing is be alert. Ask yourself, what has been bothering me lately? And how could I turn my pain into an idea? If you don't naturally think that way, then you could make a little ritual out of it and ask yourself that question every night when you brush your teeth, for example. But it's not enough to find a problem that bothers a lot of people. Your solution should be so scalable that you can reach a lot of people. You may have heard the phrase, the difference between a good idea and a great idea is scale. But even then, if you're solving a very big problem that many people have, and you can develop a solution that scales, there's still the question of whether it's the right idea for you. What you need is the right skills, the right contacts, and most importantly, a lot of passion to solve the problem. Tony Fadell writes in his book Build that you can recognize an idea worth chasing by the fact that it chases you first. Like a good relationship, there is a certain attraction between you and the idea that doesn't wear off even after months or years. So the second point is that the idea will chase you. And Tony knows what he's talking about. He had played a major role in the development of the first iPhone and iPod at Apple, and later founded Nest, which builds smart home devices like the Nest Thermostat, and is now part of Google. The common startup doctrine is to develop and test ideas as quickly as possible. Do, don't talk. Many companies now do sprints that go no longer than 5 days. The expectation is that after 5 days, you have already identified a problem, found a solution, and built the first prototype. It's true that most companies tend to spend too much time discussing instead of just trying it out. The danger with this approach, though, is that you might end up with an idea that you're not burning for. If you look at the history of successful founders, you see that to succeed, you have to have a lot of perseverance. Often you have to work on an idea for 10 or more years until it becomes a successful company, and this path is marked by dozens of setbacks. I made a whole video just on this topic titled The 3 Keys to Persevere in the Face of Failure. So you can watch it here, somewhere here. That's why it can pay off to wait and investigate an idea more closely before jumping into a startup adventure. Like most good ideas, the Nest Thermostat was born out of a frustration. Every time Tony Fadell and his girlfriend arrived at their vacation home near Lake Tahoe, they were annoyed that the house was always freezing cold the first night. There was simply no way to warm up the house before they got there. After each night on the ice floe that was supposed actually to be a cozy bed, Tony's ideas bubbled up about how to make it all better. But Tony didn't want to bother with that idea. After all, he was working on the first Apple iPhone and didn't have time to work on a second project in his spare time. But when Tony and his girlfriend decided to build a new house in Tahoe a year later, he had to deal with the issue of the thermostat again. He looked at all devices from all sorts of manufacturers and realized that the established players were unwilling to solve the problem. All the devices that were on the market were ugly, expensive, and unable to save energy. One could get the impression that R&D was concerned with the question of how can we make such a thing even more complicated. When Tony finally left Apple, actually he was kicked out by Steve Jobs himself in front of a giant audience at the first iPhone presentation.
I'm going to get rid of that and I could just remove Tony, boom. There we go, it's that simple to edit these things.
Anyway, when Tony left Apple and traveled the world with his family, he almost couldn't believe it. Every hotel, every house, no matter the country or continent, every thermostat was terrible. The whole world had the same problem. And no one, it seemed, wanted to take care of this unloved and forgotten product. For Tony, it took 10 years from the initial idea to the final decision to start a company. Tony calls this process delayed intuition, a term that goes back to the psychologist and Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman. The thesis behind it is that our intuition is often wrong when it comes to making extraordinary decisions. But since you can't turn off your intuition anyway, you should try to delay it. The third important point is to identify the unknown unknowns at this stage. The unknown what? The idea of the unknown unknown goes back to the former US Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld.
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know we don't know.
He was so proud of this clever quote that he used it for the title of his memoir. Cute. But let's take a closer look. It's these unknown unknowns that kill most ideas. It's often the risks that we are not even aware of that cause innovation to fail. Tony himself says that while it is impossible to identify our unknowns, the goal in the delayed intuition phase is to identify as many of them as possible and turn them into manageable risks. Startups often either try to downplay risks or are completely blind to them. This is a very dangerous approach that stems from naive optimism. Tony and his co-founder Matt Rogers wanted to do it better, and so they presented all the risks they could identify when they pitched their idea to venture capitalists. Listing your risks shows that you're not naive and have done your homework. If after making yourself aware of almost all the possible risks, you still feel like pitching the idea, then there's probably really something to it. So let's summarize the most important things here. You have a brilliant business idea if you solve a big problem. The idea chases you even after months or years. And even though you have turned most of the unknown unknowns into manageable risks, you're still fascinated by the idea. When those three things come together, you're onto something big. That's Tony Fadell's approach, but does it have to be the only way? I'm sure it does not. How do you recognize a brilliant idea? What are your experiences? Feel free to share it in the comments below. If you're interested in how to develop creativity, courage and perseverance, feel free to watch more of my other videos and subscribe to my channel. All my videos are about decoding and harnessing the psychology of innovation. And if you like this video, show me some love by clicking the like button.